me at Cello, Cello. You had me at Cello. You had me at Cello. Oh, you had me at Cello. Playing the cello has so many pluses. It never grows old.
Good afternoon, everybody. 5 o'clock on a Friday. Just before you start your weekend-long binge of practicing, let's do another episode of Cello Chat. With me today is Karl Lavine. Karl, it's great to see you. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing really well. I'm very much looking forward to this. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Me too.
So, would you start by telling the audience how you got started and how you got to where you are today?
Sure, you bet. Well, I started many years ago. When I was 7 years old, started playing the cello. I had about 10 years of piano along with that, and just kept playing through middle school, through high school, and played, youth orchestra. I'm a WYSO alum myself from the late 70s, which is kind of cool. Back when we had one orchestra then, moving on to two orchestras, just my senior year.
Huh.
That's when I first put the fill in there. After that, I did my bachelor's degree here at Madison. First started studying with Lowell Kreitz, and then took on lessons with Perry Karp when he first got the job with the Party Quartet. And I was one of his first students here in Madison. After that, I ended up going to Banff, Canada, School of Fine Arts. A couple years there with a piano trio. I met a guy in Madison when I was doing my bachelor's here, Daniel Schott, a violinist from Germany, and he and I had done some quartet playing together and did some touring in Germany and decided we were going to go to Banff and try to form a quartet. But we got there and we didn't really have the personnel to do that with, so we ended up doing a piano trio instead, which turned out to be great. Did a tour of Germany, Switzerland, some in France between our two years in the Banff, which was wonderful. Got to play in some really cool places. Did some recording. After my time at Banff, I ended up at the State University of New York at Stony Brook and studied there with Tim Eddy for my master's degree, which was wonderful as well. I did some playing in the city, did some off-Broadway, one Broadway show, and then ended up moving to, actually that happened after I was in Europe. I went to Europe after my time in Banff and ended up doing a two-year tour of West Side Story. So almost 600 performances of that show. That was pretty amazing. I'm not sure I could do that kind of, bus and truck thing in the States here. I don't know how those guys do it. It just blows me away. Because I was in great places. I got to be in, I started off in Paris, was in Paris for 3 months, and moved the show into other parts of big cities in France, and then we ended up in Milan and Rome. And so I got to see Europe for 2 years and play West Side Story. So that wasn't all bad. Then after that, I came back. This is late 80s, early 90s, and ended up coming back to Madison and met my wife, who's a pianist here in town and on your faculty at Whitewater. We got married, and here we are. Ended up with the job with the symphony and principal cello of that, principal cello of the chamber orchestra, and doing a lot of work with WYSO over the years and maintaining a studio. And I had quite a big studio when I first got back here, and I've had to whittle that down somewhat just because of my schedule is so insane. But I try to keep that going as much as possible. So
Yeah,
that's where we're at.
All right. Well, Karl, I don't know what drew you to cello in the first place. I mean, you said cello and piano. Was there something particular? It's interesting to hear people's stories about what the hook was for cello, if there was one.
Yeah, I don't think there was really a hook early on for me. I was involved in a lot of things. I was kind of a crazy runner as a kid. Did a lot of that kind of activity in high school for sure. I guess my parents really wanted me to try it. I'm glad I had the 10 years of piano. That was huge to have that background. I mean, I think I not maybe consciously, but think about that type of texture in writing, playing, and it certainly, helped me with harmonization, understanding So, I kind of miss it. I mean, I keep joking with Karen about, swapping off and getting each other lessons on the instruments. We've never done it, but I think we have to at some point. I would love to get back on the keyboard again. And I know she'd love to be. She played cello all through high school too.
I did not know that. Wow.
She was in the Fergus Falls Community Orchestra.
That's very cool. It's a good point that you make. I mean, I think the first thing that comes to a lot of people's mind with the benefits of piano for somebody who plays any other instrument is the theory chops that you get. But the point about how, I mean, it's like there's a fair number of pieces that come to mind where even if the composer played a string instrument, they're written rather pianistically,
Sure.
and kind of understanding that is helpful on some level, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
No.
Yeah, I agree totally. And I think that, just having the sound, I mean, playing with an instrument like that as a cellist, just having that sound and hearing the kind of textures, you have a sense of, even though I haven't really played for, decades, I still kind of know when there are things where I can maybe help out in a way in terms of, pacing certain things and getting through passages or working on ensemble issues that maybe somebody who hadn't had, piano as an instrument might not be able to pick up on right away. So
Nice.
it's a huge thing.
Nice. And let's see, can you remind me what the name of the trio was that you toured Europe with?
Kandinsky
Trio.
Trio, yep. After the
Right.
artist.
All right. And then you were in present music for at least a decade.
At least, yeah, I think 17 years.
Oh, wow. Wow. And then the Kepler Quartet as well.
Kepler Quartet as well, yep. Which is something that resulted from performances of the quartets of Ben Johnston through present music.
Right.
We ended up
Interesting,
doing
that connection. So
Yeah.
actually, I'm very curious there. Let's start there.
Sure.
I'm thinking about, of course, this thing that looms over players of variable pitched instruments, that is intonation, and you can never take it for granted. And one of the suggestions that I remember George Nykrug giving more than once as just an exercise to do was to take a half step and split it in half and split that in half and split that in half. So
Right.
16 portions, equal portions in a half step. So
Right.
for the Ben Johnston stuff, I mean, rehearsing it, putting it together is another level too. But even just in your practicing your own part, how did that, or what did that do for your approach to intonation in general?
Oh, it opened up a huge can of worms. I mean, it was remarkable the type of sound you can get, especially with string instruments, by dealing with these variable pitches. I mean, we were working on quartets that had, you were talking about the half step. Well, we had, one piece in the quartet number 7 where there's 85 pitches within inside that half step. So this is it's basically not even that audible for the human ear, right? We're talking about a 3 or 4 cent difference in terms of the Hertz meter. So, it really made it kind of problematic in a way, but interesting at the same time. I mean, on how you fit your sound and your instrument and your timbre, into an ensemble, whether it's a quartet or piano trio or working with a piano just as a duo. I mean, I find working with intonation in a piano trio is completely different than it is with string quartet.
Oh yeah.
Just from the standpoint of working with a well-tempered instrument that's perfectly in tune in fifths, and how as a quartet, you can work on different pitch variations within certain types of compositions, which is a huge thing. Like, for instance, like in Debussy, for instance, there's all sorts of things you can do with pitch that affect the quality of those sounds. So that was a huge undertaking for us. I mean, we worked a lot with chromatic tuners, obviously, to get ourselves acclimated. And a lot of these pieces we found, out of the 10 quartets, I'd say there's probably 4 or 5, 4 for sure, that are actually performable, that actually you can get to sound pretty decent. There's a few of them, like number 7, which we ended up thousands of takes for one movement. So just to get it right, just to get it documented. But the cool thing is, I mean, 3 or 4 years out now, after finishing the project, we get calls and emails from all different quartets all over the world that are trying to perform these pieces. So, it's like anything else. I mean, it's back when Shostakovich wrote his quartets. I mean, nobody wanted to touch those. They were like this thing, just out of the realm of the quartet, literature. But now they're staple,
Yeah, right. Yeah, same thing with Bartok, a number of them. Yeah.
Right.
That's an interesting point. And I also like your point about timbre, fitting in timbre, because, there's a point where intonation gets so fine that it no longer sounds in tune or out of tune. It just sounds slightly brighter, slightly darker.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, we had to work on different types of strings we were using. We changed strings a lot to get certain qualities of pitches, and to get certain chords to ring a certain way was really a challenge. But we got to the point where we'd worked on that for, this is a 15-year project. So as we got into, probably the third disc, the last four of the set, we got pretty good at it. And I think, saw things coming early on in the process and how we could fix things without just trying to get it in tune. We were trying to, like I said, we changed strings and worked on getting, different spaces to play, which is also very huge. Getting different sound qualities and how sound travels. Mic placement was a really big issue for us. That was something we discovered with about halfway through the project on number 6. Whether we should have, just direct mics on us and then have ambient microphones in the room, and somehow work with a balance to get that to line up better. Again, it goes back to how the instruments are vibrating, and how pitches come out. I mean, it's really amazing. I mean, just to give you an example of how that, very simply, how that's affected. If you're ever in a room with a ceiling fan, your ceiling fan's going around, even if it's not even on, if it's just blowing a little bit with a breeze, you can hear the beats being hit by the air being moved in the room. So that's essentially what's happening when our sound is coming out of the F-holes. And that is something that is a real big, issue. And it's a real big issue for wind players, especially, and how their sound comes out of their instruments. So the pitches issues that they face with stuff that Ben Johnston wrote, is a totally different from what we were dealing with. So, it's wild stuff. I mean, it's pretty cool.
Nice. It's, has to be part of the payoff of a 15-year project like that, is not just having the final product, but all the stuff you learned along the way.
Right.
Nice.
Oh yeah, it was really, I mean, at times it was very frustrating, and we just didn't know what we were doing and how we were going to get things to work, and were they going to sound like crap forever? It's like, is that all we could get, to get to that point? I mean, but I think overall, we were able to develop, I think, processes that really, I think, we're able to share with other people. And we keep joking about, we should copyright our strategies and copyright our pitch charts and stuff. And because we get all these calls like, please send us your pitch charts, please. From Germany and, from China. It's like all this, it's crazy people that are out there trying to play this stuff. But that's really cool. I mean, it's out there now,
That is cool.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So motivating students, there are some, once they get over the hump, as it were, and find a habit of practice and even an appreciation for the process of practicing. There's some that are just fine, of course, but then there are others that really do wish they could find a way to motivate themselves to practice more often.
Right.
Do you have some go-to approaches?
Well, I think, for me, I predominantly have been working with, over the years, high school kids and younger than that. I have a few adult students from time to time. And for me, especially this day and age, it was different when we were kids in school, I think there was a different mentality and a different set of criteria involved in, for instance, playing in school versus playing in a youth orchestra. But I think for me, I always, I tried to come up with sort of a blanket kind of a way of going about at talking about scheduling stuff for kids and how you're going to practice and use your time. But I ultimately decided that that doesn't really work. I mean, I think I found that if I just really try and pull out of the student what they are up against, what their schedules are, without getting too personal, getting into their basic kind of family schedules, what's involved there, but just really understanding their life cycle through a week or through a month, and then trying to formulate some way that they can come up with a plan that fits into that schedule. Like I said, I was a runner in high school. I ran like crazy. I ran track, cross country, did all kinds of extra sports outside of school. And I had to try to find time to practice because I really wanted to run. So I ended up, doing, 45 minutes to an hour in the morning before I went to school. And that was huge for me, huge. And I was an early morning person. It didn't bother me to get up at 5:30, 6 o'clock, So I found that, that finding time and breaking up your practice time in a day, in a week, trying to get a pattern set up where if you've got a week that's coming up in school where you've got some big testing coming up or a paper due that's, going to be a huge amount of time, trying to find ways to balance that all out. I think that was the big issue for me, was to try to get in the kids' heads and just figure out, number one, what do they really want to do with the instrument? What do they want to achieve with the instrument? Whether not referring to, a professional career 25 years down the road, but what did they want to? How do they want to have their instrument be a part of their lives right now? And to try to see if there are ways that I could help them, budget their time and maybe spend, like, break up your week so that you're working on different components of your playing at different times during the week. So it's not just sit down and play scales for 15 minutes, work on your etude for 25 minutes, pull out your Bach for 15 minutes, and then you take a break, work on your concerto for 35 minutes. It gets to be a grind, and that just doesn't fit into the way schedules are right now for kids. I'm finding,
Mm-hmm.
So I think, basically just to see if I could pull out of their own minds what their, maybe they don't know their expectations. Maybe they don't know what they want to do, but to have some sort of positive kind of their own way of making a positive kind of schedule, somehow they set them some goals for themselves,
All right. Boy, that forms a great segue in two different directions. One of them, I think, we of course model a lot for our students. We hopefully model the enthusiasm that we have for playing the instrument, which I think you totally do all the time. And then there's modeling how to practice, like how to get through a difficult passage where the coordination issues or what have you. But then I'm thinking about all of the juggling that you do of all of your performances, not just with the two symphonies, but all your chamber music playing and all the WYSO responsibilities. And so is there a way that you kind of also feel like you model what you do to juggle all of these things in terms of explaining to students how they can juggle their priorities as well?
Right. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that's, I've had to kind of develop that for myself. I mean, there are times during the year when, as you know, it gets incredibly stressful and there's all this stuff happening at the same time. I mean, September, right? School starting, WYSO starting, there's all this stuff happening. And the seasons for me, for the Symphony and Chamber Orchestra starting, so it sort of comes to just right at the very beginning. It's a huge amount of time. But I think about, the other side of that and how, how, like you say, how you get through those periods of time and how you prioritize what you need to do. And, for me, I just have to let myself go sometimes and accept the fact that I'm not going to be able to practice an hour and a half, 2 hours today, So given that, how am I going to work that in and how am I going to compensate for that fact later on in the week? Or 10 days out, depending on what's coming up. If I've got a big symphony concert coming up in 2 weeks, I can't really do that, right? So I've got to flip things around and prioritize that way. So I think that's really critical. And I think, like I was saying before, if kids can somehow, I find writing things down helps me tremendously. I mean, I can't process things that well in my mind, clearly and cleanly.
Yeah.
So I have to write this all down, and the lists sometimes get incredibly long. It's like, oh my God. And practice is like number 32. It's like, it gets to be overwhelming, and you just have to let that happen. You have to let that happen and let yourself kind of freak out for a little bit, for a few minutes, and then, okay, you've done this before, you can figure this out, and you do. I mean, everybody wakes up the next morning and you're fine. It's like, so yeah, I think trying to juggle my schedule has become, I'm better at it now than I was 10 years ago, for sure.
Right.
And the schedules change.
Yeah.
I mean, my for instance, my position with WYSO has developed into a big amount of time.
Yeah.
And now with the new building opening up,
Mm-hmm.
we've got all kinds of plans for things, especially with the chamber program. So, I'm going to have to find ways to juggle that also.
Good luck.
Yeah.
So the other direction that your previous answer made me think of, I remember, I don't know if I'm going to remember the precise Strauss piece. It wasn't Sinfonia Domestica, but there was a Strauss piece that you and I were playing. And, it just, some of the Strauss stuff, especially at a brisk enough tempo, it just seems so crazy. And I love the fact that we finished, I think it was a recording session or something. And then you said, hey, have you ever played thus and such, some other Strauss piece? Mm-hmm. And I think I said no, and you said, oh, it's a lot of fun too. So I mean, this idea.
I think I remember that. I think I was talking about Bourgeois Gentilhomme.
Yes, yeah, that's it. Thank you. So it's like having an attitude towards the challenging passages. I mean, I don't know if you generalize like this or if you just particularly like Strauss's challenging passages, but I think your approach to those challenges is in a way just like somebody who likes puzzles or something. Right. That you're going to solve it, and it's something to be looked forward to in some respect.
Right, absolutely. I mean, I think for me, it's also an aspect of something that's new for me. If I haven't played a piece, for instance, maybe I hadn't played the Strauss that you and I played, before. I mean, it's always fun for me to kind of get into a piece like that. I mean, that's just so huge, and like, how are we going to get through this piece? And you every time you play it, you hear different textures all just coming in at you from left and right, and you think to yourself, I mean, how could somebody think of all this and write all this? We just did Salome last September, and that was just an unbelievable experience for this orchestra. I mean, it was good for us for sure, and it was a lot of work. But it ended up being a really, really good performance. And in fact, I heard it broadcast the other day on the radio, and I was like, wow, this is us, this is pretty damn good, Nice. So that was a lot of fun. So yeah, I mean, I think the newness of pieces for me, that's always something that it's an impetus for me to put the time in on it and really get into the piece and learn it,
Okay, well, newness, but when you come back to something that you've played before, which happens a lot too, right, you still play it as though you come across to the audience as though you're playing it for the first time. So what do you do to keep it fresh?
Well, that's a good point. I mean, it's a good question. I think, I guess it kind of goes back to what I was saying before about listening for new aspects of the piece that I didn't hear before. I mean, we get that all the time, right? We play a Beethoven symphony. How many times have I played, Beethoven 9 or 5 or 1,
Yeah.
1. And it's like I'm always trying to find, even if I'm not trying to find, sometimes I'll hear things that come out in the texture of the orchestra on that particular day where I hadn't heard that before, So I guess number one, looking for that, and sometimes it just hits me without really realizing it,
Nice.
So
nice. Well, I think that also makes a good segue to another question I have, which is chamber music and orchestral playing. Obviously, there are similarities and there are differences. I just wonder if you have any thoughts on how, for you, the two inform each other or benefit each other.
yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot of crossover for sure, and that's something that, you know, especially with our older kids, the youth orchestra, Phil orchestra, and WYSO. You know, I'm always trying to make that correlation between playing in a chamber group and how that is going to really help you playing in an orchestra, and how playing in an orchestra is going to help you kind of, you listen differently as a chamber musician also. I think, you know, as a chamber player or as an orchestra player, for me, because I'm principal, I find myself backing off a little bit sometimes when I'm playing, so I can tell what's happening with the section behind me. Sometimes if I'm playing big and if Mark, my stand partner, you know, if we're really into it, I can't hear what's going on behind me. So in that respect, that's where I kind of click into my chamber kind of music mode, and, you know, try to pull in things that are happening around me. Like if violas are playing something that's similar to what we're doing, or if they're playing something exactly the same thing, we need to have that connection. And if we're all playing big, we're not going to be able to hear what's happening deep in the section. So, and, you know, and the more we play as a string section, I think, and bring that in, that whole, you know, that whole aspect of it in tighter, I can hear better what's happening in the winds, you know. So,
Okay.
Go ahead. No, I mean, I think just, you know, going the other way, chamber music for me, you know, we were talking about different sizings of groups, right? Piano trio, string quartet, sextets, octets, multiple kind of, you know, mixed groups like that. You had wind and strings, piano, for instance. I think, you know, having played a lot in orchestra, almost 30 years, I think, you know, for me, it's getting to a point where you can find a richness in the sound in a chamber group that's orchestral, you know. You try to get that type of sound. Obviously, it depends on the composer, right? If you're playing a Brahms piano quintet or something, there's lushness everywhere, right? It's great string writing, it's great piano writing. You know, it's one of the great, you know, joys in playing that kind of music is doing Brahms or, you know, big pieces like that that are, you know, really orchestral in nature, right? So that's kind of the crossover that goes the other way, I think, for me.
All right, but back to the orchestral thing, you mentioned the times that you back off to be able to hear the section behind you, but I dare say I'm sure I've seen times where if you think you can tell what the conductor is trying to do, you show it bigger too. So, you know, because it's like the joke, I think, is the conductors that fear, I don't know, that the people are actually watching the concert master and not them.
Mm-hmm.
But there are also times that the conductor is trying to show something, and, you know, it may not be an instantaneously intuitive connection to what you need to do on a string instrument to get what they're trying to get, and you show it when you need to. You know, go with the baton on a larger scale.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, there's a couple reasons for that. I mean, I think one time I could see myself maybe moving more demonstratively if I feel I'm not getting enough from the podium.
Uh-huh.
You know, if I feel like, well, that's not really going to help us, so I'm going to intuit what you're trying to do. You know,
Right.
and, you know, and even if I feel like I have to back off from my playing a little bit so I can hear things, doesn't necessarily correlate with moving less. You know, I can move more, but still not play as big, right?
Yeah.
Just to kind of keep that ear open to what's happening around me. That doesn't happen very often, but there are times when I feel like I'm losing a little bit of sense of what's happening as a section. And whether that's the section behind me is not playing out as much, you know, that hardly ever happens in the symphony. I mean, we have really strong players all the way back. So, you know, it is harder in a chamber orchestra. There's only 3 of us.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's really hard to know what our sound is as a section. a section of three and two basses. So that's a real challenge there. And I think, oddly, I think I find myself moving more in chamber orchestra than I do in the symphony. I think part of that is just trying to, one big thing about chamber music that I love is when I'm playing with players that are all moving kind of, we're dancing together, right? We're all moving as a unit, and there's a greater sense of unified pulse that way.
Hmm.
You don't have to worry so much about somebody playing off beats off of this, part, that part. It's all just a collective swing. You're all kind of feeling that same pulse, and that's harder to do in a symphony,
Yeah.
So I think that's why I maybe tend to move more in a chamber orchestra setting. I don't know.
I like it. All right. What projects do you have coming up? What other things are?
Well, I mean, like I said, right now, WYSO's really been a huge part of my life. I mean, we have lots of things going on with the new building coming up. We won't be in there until January of 24. The building's going to be done, they say, by this end of this summer, but they'll need to have the building sit for 3 or 4 months, and we're going to have to get our admin offices and everything squared away in there, and the library and all of our equipment. So that's going to be big. And I think with the chamber program, I've got a lot of things that I'm sort of working on to be able to use in that building. So and because of the pandemic, we lost a lot of, our numbers went way down, as I'm sure it did, we're in Whitewater. So we just, before the pandemic, I had almost 100 kids involved in the chamber program out of the 5 orchestras. So we were doing quite well. And then when the pandemic hit, we were scrambling to try to find, places to work with the kids. And a lot of families didn't want to be involved at that point. So we went down to 35 or 40 kids. So my big goal is to get that back up to where it was, maybe in a year's time. But, we had an honors quartet that was up and running for the first time this year. And we had some really, really very generous support from Serena and Lee Pondrum, who are big Madison Symphony, Chamber Orchestra, Madison Opera supporters for years. And Serena has been just great in supporting this, sponsoring this quartet. So we were able to really work hard with them, and they did a tremendous amount of recording, and they ended up winning best competition, or the best performance of the competition piece for St. Paul Chamber String Quartet competition this year. They came in 2nd overall. So that was a really big step up for us, for WYSO, to have a group that's the honors quartet, and we have an honors woodwind quartet also. And that, hopefully we'll keep going every year now. So that'll be a lot of time for me. And I usually coach that in tandem with whatever the instrumentation is going to be. So if it's going to be a piano trio, maybe me and Karen, or if it's a string quartet, maybe me and Suzanne, working with them or something. But so yeah, Clayton Tillotson did a lot of work with the group this last year. So that's a big part of it. I mean, we don't have, we have sort of the same kind of schedule that we have every year for the Rhapsody Quartet for the symphony, where we do, events in the community where we go out to special needs communities and play almost, let's say we do almost 100 of those a year. We have 10 different facilities we do, and we do 10 sessions a year. So that's a fair amount of work also. And then we do recitals on top of that. So we'll be doing that again, I'm sure, next year. And, we're doing Brahms' second piano concerto. That'll be fun with the chamber orchestra, which is going to be interesting. I'm not quite sure how that's going to work with those numbers, but we'll see.
All right. That sounds like a lot of fun. Well, best of luck with it all, Karl.
Oh, thank you.
And thanks so much for being on the program. It's really great. Lots of great insights on a number of aspects. Lots to think on.
Yeah, a lot of fun.
Yeah, terrific. And best of luck to you out there, practicing all weekend, all week. Indeed, and we'll see you this time next Friday. Take care.
You had me at